Years ago, I spent a month in the Eastern Europe country of Lithuania. I went there on a mission trip to explore the possibility of missions. I was young and single back then, and now I'm no longer single. I'm married. I like to think I'm still young. It was a strange world. This was Eastern Europe just after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the end of the Cold War. So if you can imagine all the pictures, stories you've read about what life was like in the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, there was a sense in which in my mind it was like going back 30, 40, 50 years. It was a strange place to be. It was a strange culture of food. It was a strange way to live. It was a strange language. In fact, during the whole month I was there was only one or two people who spoke English, and neither of them spoke it very well. And I didn't like any of it. In fact, I didn't like it so much that I came home 3 days early. I just couldn't take it anymore. Now I look back and think, man, 3 days was nothing. I paid extra money to change my plane ticket, so I come back 3 days early. But back then it was everything. I was in this place where I just could not stand it anymore. I was beside myself with loneliness, and I figured out the one thing that'll cut you off from the world more than anything else is language. You know, you can put up a lot of stuff if you can communicate. When you can't communicate, your world gets really, really small in a hurry. And it was so frustrating. In fact, we stopped on the way over. My plane stopped in Warsaw, Poland, and I had to mail a letter to a guy because on the way back I was coming through Warsaw. I had overnight, and I was going to ask him to pick me up. And this was the day before email and all that. So I actually left the boarding area, and apparently, unbeknownst to me, went through customs, just left the airport to mail my letter, dropped it in a postal box there, and tried to re-enter, and all the customs agents there in Poland wanted to know why I didn't have a stamp in my passport. They couldn't figure out for the life of them how I got into the country, and I'm trying to explain to them in English, and they don't talk English very well, didn't speak English, and I'm trying to explain to them, hey, I got to get on my flight, it's getting ready to leave, and I don't get there, I'm going to be here a lot longer than this. And so finally they let me back through, but the world was so small, it's just a strange place to live. The good news is I was there voluntarily. And one of these days I'd like to go back. I imagine it would be nothing like it was back then, now 30, 40 years later from that event. But I also imagine it was nothing like being 14 or 15 years old in 605 BC and being taken from the only life you had ever known, from the only place you had ever lived, and dragged by the force of a foreign army hundreds of miles away to be planted in an entirely different culture. An entirely different world, an entirely different religion, entirely different everything. And yet that's exactly what happened to Daniel. Except he didn't get to leave after 30 days. He was stuck. In fact, he stayed there for more than 70 years. That's how long this was for him. But in the story of Daniel, we see an amazing story of God's sovereignty and God's providence and God's control of things. And what I hope it is for us in these next weeks as we start through the book of Daniel, what I want us to understand today is that we are strangers. We're not strangers like a young American visiting Lithuania. We're not even really strangers like a young Jewish boy who is captive in Babylon. We're strangers in our own world. Have you ever thought about that? You ever thought about the fact that we who have committed to follow Christ are what the New Testament calls strangers and aliens here? We don't belong here. Now, please don't leave. Because when I say we don't belong here, I don't mean in the church building. And I certainly don't mean in the world, because I don't want to do funerals. Okay, so please don't leave. But understand, we are strangers and aliens here. We are, in the words of Philippians, we are citizens of another kingdom. God has transferred us out of the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of His dear Son, and yet for a period of time, we are here in this world, and we are strangers in this world. We know the language, we know the culture, we know the customs, we know the religious practices, we know our neighbor, we know all these things, and yet I wonder sometimes, have we ever really wrestled with just how strange this world should be to us? And I want us to think about that. This morning, Daniel chapter 1, as we begin in verse 1, as we should begin, right? Chapter 1, verse 1. The third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged. Let's just set the history here real quick. All right, all the way back, God had a people, Israel, and God had promised them, as long as you obey me, I'll bless you, I'll protect you, I'll give you all your crops, I'll give you everything you need, as long as you follow me. If you disobey me, I'm going to kick you out of this land. I'll give you a famine, I'll give you a drought, I'll give you a disease, I'll bring enemies on you. And there came a point in the life of Israel, life of Judah, where God said that's enough. Here's how it's described in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Let me read it to you. The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. He's talking about Jews. God sent these prophets to them again and again because of his compassion. He sent these prophets, please turn back. Don't keep going down this road. But they continually mocked the messengers of God. They despised his words and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people until there was no remedy. That's 605. God said, there is no remedy. This is it. Therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, or what we'll call the Babylonians, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary. He had no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or infirm. He gave them all into his hand. That's God. God gave them all. All the articles of the house of God, great and small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, the treasures of the king's office, he brought them all to Babylon. Then they burned the house of God, broke down the walls of Jerusalem, burned all its fortified buildings with fire, destroyed all its valuable articles. Those who had escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon. They were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. And all the days of its desolation, it kept Sabbath until 70 years were complete. Now get this story. God said, when you disobey me long enough, I'm going to kick you out of this land. And the prophet Jeremiah comes along, and Jeremiah says, it's going to be 70 years. God's done with you. God's done with you. You're going to be in a foreign land for 70 years. And here's that famous verse we know from Jeremiah 29:15. I know the plans I have for you. That was about Israel and Babylon. Okay? That's about Israel being in Babylon. And that's why God says to him, you're going to be there 70 years. Go, build your houses, plant your gardens, do your business, because you're going to be there a while, because that's the judgment of God. And when we come to Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, Jehoiakim, king of Judah, is a king who was appointed. He was a descendant of David, but he was put on the throne by Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. Now, here's another little history for you. We get too tied down in history. We're not going to finish this. And so let me talk quick, and you listen quick. All right. Egypt and Assyria formed an alliance to go against Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. Actually, Nabopolassar is the king of Babylon at this time. They meet at a place called Carchemish. How many of you have ever heard of the Battle of Carchemish? That was 605 BC. And so in the Battle of Carchemish, Nebuchadnezzar defeats the Egyptians and the Assyrians. All right? And on the way back from that battle, apparently what happens is Nebuchadnezzar stops off by Jerusalem and besieges the city. And besieging was a way you cut off the city from all its supplies. You try to basically isolate it and starve it into surrender. And that's what they did. And that's how this comes about. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, comes to Jerusalem. He besieges. Now, here's the key thing in verse number 2. See the first couple of words there? The Lord gave. Why did this happen? Did it happen because Nebuchadnezzar was a really good military guy? Did it happen because Babylon was really strong and Israel wasn't? This whole thing starts off with the sovereign control of God over nations. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into the hand of Babylon. The Lord did this. The Lord is the one who brought about this. Remember what I just read out of 2 Chronicles 36? They killed all these people. The Lord brought that about. When all of these captives of Judah end up in Babylon, the Lord brought that about. And if you'll notice there in your English translation, the word Lord in verse number 2 is a capital L, little o, little r, little d. Now here's why I point that out to you, because if you pay attention when you read your English Bible, that's not the usual word that's used for God. The usual word when God is talking about his relationship with Israel, it's a capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's God's covenant name, as it's normally described. His name says, I'm going to be a God to you. I'm going to be your protector. I'm going to be your defender. I'm the one who made a covenant with you. I'm going to keep that covenant. That's not this God. That's not this name. Now, it's not because it's a different God. This is a name of God that most often in the Old Testament is used to refer to God's sovereignty, his control, his power. See, right off the bat, here's what you need to understand out of Daniel, is that everything that happens is because of God. And we're going to read in the book of Daniel some really disturbing stories. And then when we get to the end of Daniel 1 through 6 is the story of Daniel. These stories you're all familiar with, right? The fiery furnace and the lion's den and Daniel praying. All right, we're familiar with those. You heard those all in Sunday school. Then you get to the end of the book, Daniel 7 through 12, and things get even stranger. Because then it's these prophecies about what's going to happen. And you start reading about beasts and horns and all kinds of weird things. And we'll get there. But here's what you got to understand. God is sovereign over all of it. There is not one thing that happens in our world that's outside the control of a sovereign God. In Daniel chapter 4, we're going to read the words, who can stretch out his hand and stop God? And the answer is nobody. When you look around, even today at international affairs, and here's what I'm convinced of, is that I don't want to know a lot about international affairs. Right? I just look around and say, man, there's some strange stuff going on out there, and I don't understand nearly enough to get involved in that. I got a hard enough time managing my own life. I don't need to manage nations. But there's not one thing going on in our world today that is outside the control of a sovereign God. Now, here's where some of your minds are going right off the bat. And we've talked about this before, because this is the big problem. People have this whole idea is that if God is so sovereign and God is so powerful and God is so great, then why didn't he stop all the nonsense? Why doesn't God do it differently? And this week, for some reason, I took a little trip down memory lane to about 2 years ago when I preached here I think it may have been the first Sunday I preached here as a kind of preparation to be a candidate, however you want to describe all that stuff. And I made this comment out of Isaiah when I was preaching out of Isaiah. There's a lot of people out here who would say, God, if I were you, I would do it differently. Don't we say that sometimes? God, if I were you, I'd do it differently. And I said in that message, remind myself of it this week, that you might do it differently, but you don't have your own universe. You don't get to do it differently. Right, and we're not ones to talk. See, when I read this story, like, God, maybe one more day they would have repented this time. And sometimes that's the way we think. That's my bent as a pastor. When I talk to people about sin and struggles in their life, I'm thinking, one more time, it's the next message I'm going to preach that's really going to cause them to repent. It's the next conversation I have with them that's really going to cause them to see you can't keep doing that. It's the next one. And eventually God said, there is no next one. There is no remedy. I am bringing the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. In fact, in the book of Habakkuk, when Habakkuk's crying out, oh God, how long am I going to have to see all this stuff? He's talking about the years leading up to 605. In fact, Habakkuk, the book of Habakkuk may have been written maybe 10 to 15 years prior to Daniel's, to these events. And the world is getting worse and worse, and Habakkuk cries out, God, how long do I have to look at this nonsense? God, why do you have to do this? Why can't you protect me from this? Why can't you do it differently? And God said to Habakkuk, I'm doing something you wouldn't believe even if I told you. And I've told you a story before. I used to think, man, that's such a great promise. God's doing something I wouldn't believe even if he told me. And then I read the next verse one day. I'm bringing the Chaldeans against you. That's Daniel. God is in control of it. And the result of that is that Israel gets overrun. The vessels of the house of God, those things. Remember, if you read Exodus, how they constructed the temple, and they got the table and the candles and the table of the showbread and the altar and all these things. You know where they went? They went to a place in verse number 2. It's called Shinar. How many of you ever heard of Shinar before? You know the first time Shinar shows up in the Bible? You know what's going on there? There's a group of people in Genesis chapter 11 who say, hey, let's build a tower. And we know it as the Tower of Babel. Let's build a tower to get us high. Let's make a name for ourselves. Shinar is not mentioned very often, but I think there's a sense in which this connection is, Shinar was a place that is well known in Genesis for the place that wickedness got really, really bad. And human arrogance got really, really big. And now Shinar shows up at the place when God judges people. God's candles and his table and all those implements of worship that were used to worship the one true and living God are now in the temple of a god who is probably the god Bel, or what we might know as Marduk. Now why would you, if you're a conquering king, why would you take all of their God's stuff and go put it in the temple of your God? And the answer is because, hey, my God's bigger than your God. Why do you think I got his stuff? I took it from you. If your God was so great, he could have kept all his stuff over there. And now because my God's greater, I'm going to take all that stuff you used for worship of your God. I'm going to use it for worship of my God because my God's bigger than your God is. And the God of Israel was willing to let that happen. He stood back and said, take it. And it wasn't because the god Bel or the god Marduk was greater. The only reason this happened is because the Lord gave them over. The Lord did this. And he was doing it out of judgment. God is sovereign. There is no governmental authority that can go beyond the plan of God. And look, I get it. You know, we live in a world of messed up politics and messed up government. I understand all that. I don't understand enough to speak about it. And I got some pretty good stuff right here to speak about, so that's what I'm going to stick with. But we live in a world wondering, God, why don't you do something else? And I don't know. But God is ruling over all the events of human history. Not one nation is outside the ruling authority of God. I don't understand that, but as I've often said, I'll remind you again this morning, if I could understand God, he wouldn't be all that impressive. If you could understand God, I don't mean to attack you this morning, but if you could understand God, he wouldn't be all that impressive. God is way bigger than that. God is way greater than anything you and I think. And God is at work through these events, bringing them to pass. But it's not just that God is ruling the events of human history. Let's look on here, chapter 1, verse 3. King Ashpenaz, the chief of officials, to bring some of the sons of Israel, including royal family nobles, youths in whom was no defect. They were good-looking, intelligent, every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding, discerning knowledge. In other words, probably not you. It's other people he's looking for. He had the ability for serving in the king's court. Ordered them to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Now, why was he going to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans? Because you're going to be here a while. Learn the language. There was a sense in which, when I was in Lithuania, I was going to be there a little while. I learned a few words. But I didn't really set myself out to learn the language because after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I wasn't going to be able to use it anymore. To this day, I don't know that I've ever met another Lithuanian, especially one that didn't speak English. A few years later, I spent about 3, 4 months, 5 months in Brazil. I don't remember exactly how long now. I learned a little Portuguese. But again, I didn't learn enough really to use. I'll find out a couple weeks I'm going back to Brazil. I'll be preaching down there for a week and I'll find out how much I remember. 3 words maybe. If you're not going to be there a while, you don't need to learn the language. You don't need to learn the cultures. But Nebuchadnezzar said, these guys, you're going to be here a while. You learn the language, you learn the cultures. We're going to indoctrinate you in our way of life. We're going to teach you what it means to be a Chaldean, a Babylonian. We're going to teach you everything you need to know to be successful in this world. So they were teaching them. They appointed for them a daily ration of the king's choice food and the wine, 3 years of education, so you can get prepared to serve the king. Now here's what's interesting. In verse number 6, he mentions 4 names. I don't know how many Jewish young men were here. The ones we're familiar with are Daniel, right? And here's the odd thing about this passage. My guess is that if you just take a survey of churches as a whole, most people don't know what Daniel's Babylonian name was. It was Belteshazzar. Not Belshazzar, that's another guy. Belteshazzar. However, the irony is most people don't know what the other 3 people's Hebrew names were. They know Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They don't know the other 3, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It's kind of one of those weird things, but here's what had happened. They get these people there, and they change their names. Why did they change their names? Well, there's a lot of power in a name, and the meaning of the name was significant. Daniel's name meant God is judge. God is my judge. Hananiah's name means God is gracious. Mishael means who is what God is, who's like our God. Azariah, Yahweh has helped. I won't bore you with the details this morning, but if you knew Hebrew, you would see every single one of those names. You would know exactly what it means. Nobody have to explain it to you. Why did they change the names? Perhaps it was because they wanted to erase all evidence of that former life, that former religion, the God who they thought had been defeated. We don't want every time we call you to help the king, we don't want to be reminded of your God. We want to be reminded of our God. And every single name they gave him was a reference to one of their own gods. They were totally trying to change the whole culture of them, trying to change their whole life by renaming them. But Daniel had a little problem here. Verse number 8, Daniel made up his mind he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or the wine which he drank. Now, Daniel purposed in his heart, if you have a King James Version, Daniel said, I'm not going to be a part of all of this. There are certain things I can avoid, but I'm not going to do that. Now, why? Why was it that Daniel was not going to participate in the food and drink of the king's table? There may be 2 reasons here. We don't know for sure, but there's a strong possibility that one of the reasons was because of the law. The Israel had certain dietary laws, and every time I read it, I'm thankful I'm no longer under that law, because there were some restrictions. And Daniel looked at that food that they were serving and said, if I eat that food, it's going to cause me to violate the law that God has given, the law I'm supposed to be loyal to. And so it's entirely possible, quite likely, that one of the reasons was that Daniel thought that food is going to cause me to violate the law of God, what God has commanded of me. And so in a sense, Daniel was taking the approach that it's better to obey God than men. Now, I don't know what would happen had he been refused. Had this guy said, no, you're going to eat our food. I don't know what happens then. By God's grace, we'll never know. But we know that he said, I'm not going down that road. The second reason why Daniel may have resisted this is because food was commonly used in worship practices. It was in Israel, right? I mean, you had the table of showbread. It was bread. You had sacrifices that were burnt offerings, and those burnt offerings were later eaten in many cases. Right? Now here's the point, is that quite frequently the food was used as part of the worship of God. In fact, this shows up in the book of 1 Corinthians in the New Testament. And some of you are familiar with that passage where, should we eat this meat offered to idols? I don't have time to get into 1 Corinthians this morning. Lord willing, we're going to do that tonight. All right, so come back tonight if you want to know that end of the story in the New Testament. But let me address it this way. Say, Daniel believed in his conscience, if I eat that meat, I'm going to violate the law of God. I'm going to participate in the worship of a false god, and I'm not willing to do that. Daniel had to make a choice. He had to choose whether or not he was going to live by the courage of his convictions or whether he was going to give in to the pressure of a foreign king. What would you do? What would you do? It's easy for us sitting here, 2,600 years later, so, oh, yeah, I'd do the same thing. But would we? Would we? Hang on to that thought. Hang on to that thought. Verse number 9. God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. Remember there I said God is in control over the nations. God's in control of the big things. I want you to see, secondly, this morning, God's in control of small things like people. It wasn't just the big nations and the big, it was this commander of the official, this Ashpenaz, maybe a title of this chief commander, this guy who was in charge. God gave Daniel favor. He changed the heart of Ashpenaz to look favorably on Daniel. And his response is, if I do this for you and you turn out bad, he's going to chop my head off. But I'll give you a chance. I mean, if I thought the option was losing my head, I'm not sure I'd be willing to give that chance. But Ashpenaz was. He said, I'll give you a chance. 10 days, they agreed this, 10 days, and take a look at us and see in 10 days, if we're not as good as everybody else is, then you deal with us then. So he listened to them. Why? Because God was at work in individuals. Not just the big things, in the individuals. Every single person that you come across, it's by the sovereign providence of God. That's just a weird thought. That's a strange thought. And I don't know how God's at work in all that. I don't get that. I don't understand that. But day after day, we encounter what some have called divine appointments. That God is at work in our lives and God is at work in the other lives. And God brings us to people and across people and with people and then away from people at certain times according to His providence. Because God's at work not just in the big things, He's also at work in the small things. He listened to them. He tested them for 10 days. And verse 15 says, at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. Fatter there is a good thing. They like that. Why? Because God was with them. God was at work in this. So the overseer continued, verse 16, to withhold their choice food and the wine which they would drink and kept giving them vegetables. And as for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Don't you like that? They chose to follow God, and God gave them knowledge. God gave them intelligence. God blessed them. God made it all work out just fine. Except they didn't go back home. They were still captives in a foreign land. But God was giving them good things in a foreign land, right? And we read this story, and at the end of the days, verse 18, which king had specified for presenting, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. He trotted them all in there, lined them all up, and the king talked with them. And out of all of them, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael, and Azariah as they entered the king's personal service. Not one was as good as these 4 Hebrew young men were. As far as a matter of wisdom and understanding about which king consulted him, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in his realm. 10 times better. Man, isn't God good? I was talking to somebody this week, telling me about their ministry journey, been this church, that church, they're now with this. And man, God's really good to us, gave us a big house. And I'm like, so what if God had given you a little shack? Was He not good to you then? I didn't actually say that. I didn't figure that'd be the best way to influence that conversation. But how many of us have bought into what I've called often the prosperity gospel? This idea that if you choose to follow God, God's going to make you wiser and smarter and richer and better than everybody else. That's a gospel that all across the world today is being preached from pulpits. There are people standing up and telling, if you'll just give your life to God, He'll make your life better. If you'll just put some money in the offering plate, God will give it back to you this week. Got health problems? Have faith, God will fix it. Another conversation I had this week, we were joking with a guy about his age, saying he just turned 33. I said, I know some good men who died at 33. Jesus, He was pretty perfect, right? And they killed Him. See, here's what a lot of people don't know about Daniel. You remember Jeremiah? Jeremiah and Daniel prophesied at the same time. They were prophets together. And Daniel goes to Babylon. Jeremiah stays home. Isn't that great? I got to stay home with Daniel. All those guys, man, I feel bad for them. And then they have this experience, and God blesses them, and God even gives Daniel a high place in government. Look at verse number 21. Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. That goes all the way probably to 539. Almost 70 years later, Daniel is still somebody in Babylon. You know where Jeremiah was? Jeremiah stayed home, sure. Ended up running for his life. He ends up in a well. He ends up being persecuted, being imprisoned. Was God not good to Jeremiah? There's a third guy you probably never heard of, at least not in Jeremiah. His name was Uriah. Now, when you hear the name Uriah, you probably think of David's mighty man. But there's a guy, Uriah, who has just prophesied in the name of the Lord, Jeremiah 26 tells us. He prophesied in the name of the Lord. Uriah, the son of Shemaiah from Kiriath Jearim. He prophesied against this city and against this land, words similar to all those of Jeremiah. Uriah was a guy just like Jeremiah, preaching the same message. And when King Jehoiakim and all his mighty men, all the officials heard his words, the king sought to put him to death. And Uriah heard it, was afraid. He fled to Egypt. God delivered him, right? And Jehoiakim sent men to Egypt. Elnathan, the son of Achbor, and certain men went with him to Egypt. They brought Uriah from Egypt and led him to King Jehoiakim, who slew him with a sword and cast his dead body into the burial place of the common people. Where's God now? You see, if your idea is, if I'm going to follow God, God's going to bless me with all these things. If I live by the courage of my convictions, if I take Daniel's approach, say, I'm not eating that food, God will take care of me. He might. In the burial place of the common people. You ready for that? Are you ready for God who doesn't give you what you think you deserve? Are you ready for God who doesn't repay your obedience with immediate success? Are you willing to not be Daniel? See, a lot of us aren't. We like the story of Daniel because it gives us hope that, man, if we don't eat that food, God will make me smart. And it doesn't work that way. You see, three contemporaries, Daniel, he ends up with a pretty good life. Very high-ranking official over the whole kingdom of Babylon. Jeremiah, who gets chased around, gets imprisoned, gets mistreated, gets thrown in a well for punishment. And Uriah, who actually dies. All three of them made the exact same choices about following God. And all three of them have very different outcomes. And the thing is, on the front end of it, you don't know what the outcome's going to be. You make your choice not knowing what God's going to do. And understand this, three people, three outcomes, and God hasn't promised you anything until the end. Now, make sure you get to the end. God hasn't promised you anything until the end. Remember the whole Bible in 2 words? God wins. God wins. Until then, I don't know what God's going to do with you. I don't know what God's going to do with me. I remind you, Jesus died at 33. Perfect man. In the plan of God. See, a lot of people have this view of God that if I follow God, God will fix my life. And here's the reality. If you follow God, your life may get worse. Your life may get worse. Are you okay with that? You okay with that? Yeah, you got a verse on that one? Yeah, Jesus, he died. He's the guy who he followed God. He was God. He died. Paul, the apostle, lived his life. One of the most energetic, passionate missionaries there's ever been. And they beat him, and they imprisoned him, and they stoned him and left him for dead. And he was naked and hungry and in peril and beat him 5 times. They beat him. And eventually they beheaded him. You okay with that? Hey, God, that wasn't really fair to Paul. Paul gave his whole life to you. He traveled all over the world trying to preach the gospel to people, and you let him get beheaded? If all you have is a prosperity gospel, you'll never make sense of the Bible. Now, did God abandon Paul? No, Paul said, to depart is far better. For me to live as Christ, but to die is gain. I ain't up in heaven. Where's the downside? Nevertheless, it's more needful for me to remain here with you. See, we live in a broken world. We don't live in a world where every Christian gets rich. Some of them do. And some of them die. Why? Because there's Daniels and there's Jeremiahs and there's Uriahs. And it doesn't work out the same for everybody. But here's what God says in 2 Corinthians. Momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. Uriah died. I just go on a limb and think that was painful in those last few seconds. But it was a momentary light affliction that produced an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. You think of Paul kneeling over that executioner's chopping block. A light momentary affliction. Hey, it'll be over in a second. Literally. And then he goes to heaven. I don't know what God has for you. I don't know what God has for me. I'm guessing it's not Shinar in Babylon. I'm guessing the second coming of Nebuchadnezzar ain't going to be here in Taylor this morning to traipse us all off to some foreign country. I don't know what it is for you. But let me give you this morning, let me give you 3 core truths about your convictions. Number 1, your convictions must be built on the sovereignty of God over all things. You got to live your life based on God's sovereignty. He is in control of it, not me. Not you, not your spouse, not your employer, not your bank, not even your government. God is in control. You have to live by the core conviction that God is sovereign over all creation. Every single part of it. And I've said often, if I didn't believe that, I'd never preach again. I don't have a lot of hope apart from that. There's too many things in the world I can't explain. But I think the Scripture teaches that. That's why the Lord gave Jehoiakim in their hand, because he was in control. That's why the Lord gave Daniel favor with Ashpenaz, because he was in control of it. God is sovereign over all things. Secondly, your convictions must be built on your conscience according to the revelation of God. Daniel, I can't eat that food. Not doing it. I've got a conviction. I can't do that. Now, that was based on what he believed God required. What does God require of you? Based on his word. Do you know the Scriptures well enough to know what God requires? Your convictions have to be driven by the revelation of God to us, not by the shifting views of the age. We're strangers in this world. Every day I read the news, and every day I say, I'm not reading the news today. I don't want to, but every day I end up reading the news because apparently I have no discipline. So every day I read the news, and it reminds me, I'm a stranger here. The headlines I read, the stories I read, they don't resonate with me. I'm like, that's just wrong. You can't do that. That's unbiblical. And otherwise, nobody cares. I'm a stranger here. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, there's a large degree as to which we will be strangers in this world. We'll be exiles, hundreds of miles from the kingdom of God. But in that world, we must live by our convictions rather than give in to the spirit of the age. It's going to be tested. It's going to be tested. Will you live by your convictions? It might cost you something. It might cost me something. It might cost us something. I'm not one of those chicken little Christians who thinks the sky is falling. Okay? The sky is still right where it's always been. I don't know what God has. But we have to live by convictions that are built on the revelation of God to us in His Word. Figure out what God wants and live that way. Your last core truth. Your convictions have to be built on the sovereignty of God, all things. They have to be built on your conscience, built on revelation. And number 3, your courage of convictions must rest in God's sovereignty to do as He pleases. And when you live by your convictions and it doesn't turn out the way you think it does, you know what you do? Thank you, God. I'll accept this. Yeah, God, I wish it was different. But this is what you have for me for this day. I will live with your sovereignty. And when I see somebody else who has it better, you know what I'll say? Praise God. Their life's not my life. I'd like to be able to do it with joy. Sometimes it's all I can do to do it. And probably sometimes I don't do it because I get kind of angry. I get a little bit jealous. I can get a little bit upset about why God did for them. Why didn't you for me, God? And then I realized Jesus died on the cross. What can I expect? God is sovereign. He can do as he pleases. My job is to obey. Do we recognize our strangeness in this current age? Do we even recognize what it means to be strange? Do we know what worldliness is? I got a whole section of stuff here I'm just not going to get to. I'm going to get to it tonight. So be here for the end of it. All right? But let me encourage you. I think sometimes we as Christians don't know God's word enough to know how strange we should be. I know sometimes you look at other people sitting down the aisle, again, oh, they're strange. We don't understand theologically and in terms of how we view the world, just how strange this world should be to us. We've too often bought into the spirit of the age. What does it mean to be worldly? Some of you grew up with a list. You know what it means to be worldly. Because you got measurements about your skirt lengths and your hair lengths and a list of movies and TV shows, because that's what worldly means. That is not what worldliness is. Worldliness is fallen values expressed in culture. And again, we'll develop that tonight some, so be here for it. But here's what I want to tell you is sometimes we as Christians, we don't know how strange we should be. And we're looking at Daniel. And Daniel knew, I can't do that. We don't know. We are strangers and aliens in this world. Our citizenship is in heaven. Hebrews 11, these all died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and welcomed them from a distance and having confessed they were strangers and exiles on the earth. Would to God we could buy into that. I don't belong here. I live here and I'm going to do it faithfully and I'm going to be engaged in the world God's put in front of me. But if I can quote that old gospel song, this world's not my home. I'm just passing through. Can we just understand we are strangers and exiles on the earth? God, through the prophet Jeremiah, told Israel, you're going to be there 70 years. So be there. Plant your gardens, build your houses, live faithfully. But you're only there for 70 years. And in 70 years, I'm coming back to get you. You know what God tells us? You live in this world. Live faithfully. Plant your gardens. Build your houses. Raise your families. But one day I'm coming back to get you. Don't ever forget that. Christ rose from the dead. Conquered all the kingdoms of this age. And the Revelation puts it this way, that all the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our Christ because he wins. He wins. Don't ever forget it. Oh, Father, you are sovereign in all the worlds you made. Your mighty word was spoken, and light and life obeyed. Your voice commands the seasons and bounds the ocean shore, sets stars within their courses, and stills the tempest roar. We like that, right? You created the world. Father, you're sovereign in this creation, but oh, Father, you are sovereign in all affairs of men. No powers of death or darkness can thwart your perfect plan. All chance and change transcending supreme in time of space, you hold your trusting children secure in your embrace. Oh, Father, you are sovereign, the Lord of human pain, transmuting earthly sorrows to gold of heavenly gain. All evil overruling as none but conqueror could. Your love pursues its purpose, our soul's eternal good. Oh, Father, you are sovereign. We see you dimly now, but soon before your triumph, earth's every knee shall bow. With this glad hope before us, our faith springs up anew. our sovereign Lord and Savior, we trust and worship you. Let's do it together. He's sovereign. Live like it. Trust him. Follow him. He wins. Not Nebuchadnezzar and nobody else. In the end, God wins. Our musicians are going to come as we close together this morning. Oh, Father, you are sovereign. Let's sing it with confidence. Let's sing with joy. Let's sing with submission. Embrace it. Rest in the sovereign providence of a loving God. Let's pray together. Father, you are sovereign. We're called to live as strangers in this age. May we do it with faithfulness. May we do it with conviction that you are ruling, and we're called to obedience. Make us strangers and aliens to this present age, looking for the blessed hope and the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from every lawless deed. May we live by the courage of our convictions based on your word. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.